Hello, friends! Everyone called Gen Z lazy, careless, even useless. But history has a strange way of proving critics wrong. In Nepal, the same generation that was mocked, Gen Z, has now shaken an entire nation to its core. What started as frustration turned into the largest youth-led uprising the country has seen in decades. And today, this movement has already forced Nepal's Prime Minister, KP Sharma Oli, to resign. But resignation wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The protests grew so intense that the Prime Minister's residence was set ablaze. The parliament, a symbol of Nepal's fragile democracy, was engulfed in flames. The finance minister was chased down the streets by furious protesters, beaten with shoes, a humiliation symbolic of people's anger. And, in the chaos, tragedy struck. The wife of a former prime minister lost her life when her home was torched. This raises a powerful question. What pushed a peaceful nation to this breaking point? Was this all simply because of a social media ban? Friends, the truth is far more complex. The ban was only a spark. Behind it lay years of corruption, unemployment, and anger boiling beneath the surface. So let us go step by step and understand how Nepal, in September 2025, found itself on fire. On the morning of 8th September 2025, the streets of Kathmandu were different. Thousands of young people had gathered in the heart of the capital. They weren't carrying guns or weapons, only banners, placards, and hope. Most of them were between 20 and 25 years old, members of the so-called useless generation. Some still wore their school uniforms. Others came straight from their colleges, bags still slung over their shoulders. The protest had been organized by Hami Nepal, an NGO that had been quietly mobilizing youth for months. They chose a symbolic starting point, Maitigar Mandala, a circular monument that has always been associated with demonstrations and resistance. From there, the young marchers began their journey towards the parliament. At first, the protest was peaceful. There was no violence, no destruction, just chants, slogans, and the determination of a generation that refused to stay silent. But governments often fear the power of peaceful voices more than anything else. And so, the state responded in the only way it seemed to know, with force. Police units were already waiting. As the crowd moved closer to Parliament, barricades went up. Water cannons fired. Tear gas shells exploded in the air. Rubber bullets were shot into the crowd. Students stumbled, blinded and coughing. Parents rushed to cover their children's faces with handkerchiefs. Yet, instead of dispersing, the crowd grew angrier. A few protesters broke through the barricades and entered the Parliament complex. And what happened next shocked an entire country. The police, instead of restraint, opened fire with live bullets. Not rubber bullets, not warning shots, real bullets. At least 19 young protesters were killed on the spot. Over 400 others were injured, their blood staining the streets of Kathmandu. Among the dead was a 12-year-old child, a reminder of how indiscriminate and reckless the violence was. When news of this massacre spread, silence was no longer an option. Nepalese citizens, already simmering with anger, poured into the streets in even greater numbers. Kathmandu's wide roads, usually choked with motorbikes and taxis, were now seas of people. The government panicked and declared a curfew at 3:30 p.m. But curfews mean little when an entire nation rises together. Instead of shrinking, the protests multiplied. They spread beyond Kathmandu, to Pokhara, Butwal, Bharatpur, and Damak. For the first time in years, Nepal saw unity across its fractured society. Bound by one truth, people had had enough. Was it really about social media? Now, friends, many international media outlets were quick to simplify the story. Nepal protests over social media ban, but to call it just that would be unfair. Yes, banning social media apps was a trigger, but behind it stood decades of corruption, arrogance, and neglect. Still, let's first understand the social media issue, because it played an important role in igniting the fire. Back in November 2023, Nepal government announced new rules. All social media platforms must register with the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology and set up a local office. The government claimed this was to fight hate speech, fake news, online fraud, and cybercrimes. On paper, it sounded reasonable, but in reality, out of all the major platforms, only one big name complied: TikTok. The others, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, refused. Nepal's Supreme Court then gave the government the power to ban unregistered platforms. By 28th of August 2025, the government issued an ultimatum: register by 3rd of September or be banned. The deadline passed, and by early September, 26 social media platforms were blocked in Nepal. Think about it. Overnight, Nepalese citizens lost access to almost every major platform except TikTok. Facebook, gone. Instagram, gone. YouTube, blocked. WhatsApp calls to family members abroad, cut off. To the government, this was about control. To the people, it was a direct attack on their freedom of speech. And here lies the irony. TikTok, the only app left standing, became the very platform where youth started exposing politicians. The hashtags NepoKids and NepoBaby exploded. Videos comparing the daily struggles of ordinary families with the luxury lifestyles of politicians' children went viral. One poster from the protests summed it up perfectly. Politicians' children bring Gucci bags from abroad. The children of the common people are brought back in coffins. The coffin line referred to another painful truth: thousands of Nepalese youth leaving the country to fight and die in foreign wars just to earn money. Friends, when we look at the pictures of protests in Nepal, burning parliament buildings, streets filled with slogans, young people clashing with police, it is easy to think this all happened because of just one decision: the ban on social media. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. The truth is that behind the anger of these young people lies years of pain, frustration, and betrayal. Nepal has always been a country of great potential. Its mountains bring in millions of tourists. Its rivers have the power to generate electricity for the entire region. Its culture is rich, its people hard-working. And yet, for decades, ordinary Nepalese have been forced to live with corruption, unemployment, and hopelessness. So, when the government cut off their last tool of expression, social media, it felt like the final straw. Let's break down the deeper issues fueling this fire. Nepal's youth population is massive. Every year, thousands of graduates enter the job market with dreams of a better life. But where are the opportunities? Factories? Hardly. Tech industry? Still small. Tourism? Yes, but seasonal and unstable. The truth is, Nepal's economy has been unable to provide meaningful jobs for its young citizens. Instead, the government's answer to unemployment has been exporting its workforce abroad. Today, nearly every Nepalese family has at least one relative working in a foreign country. In fact, Nepal's economy runs on remittances, the money sent back by workers abroad. According to reports, over 25% of Nepal's GDP comes from these remittances. But behind those numbers are heartbreaking stories. Young men and women leave their families, travel thousands of kilometers, and work under inhuman conditions just to send a few dollars back home. Some work in construction camps in the Middle East, sleeping in cramped dormitories. Others become domestic workers, often facing abuse. Many never return alive. And then, the most shocking reality: Nepali youth fighting in foreign wars. Friends, imagine this. Your own government cannot give you a job, so you decide to join the army of another country. Thousands of Nepali young men have been recruited as soldiers in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Why? Because in Russia, they are promised good salaries, better facilities, and citizenship after service. But promises do not stop bullets. Hundreds of Nepali youths have already lost their lives on foreign soil. They went not as tourists, not as students, but as soldiers in a war that had nothing to do with Nepal. Meanwhile, politicians' children live in luxury abroad, studying in expensive universities, posting pictures of vacations in Europe. This contrast burns in the hearts of Nepal's youth. It is not just about jobs. It is about dignity. When a country cannot even protect the dignity of its young generation, rebellion becomes inevitable. Now let us talk about corruption. Corruption in Nepal is not new. But what makes people angry is that it has become almost normal. Government contracts go only to friends and relatives. Licenses are issued not to the qualified, but to the connected. Hospitals, schools, even disaster relief funds. Nothing escapes the shadow of corruption. In 2023, a major scandal shook the nation. Senior politicians and officials were caught taking bribes in exchange for favors. Yet, instead of punishment, most walked away freely. The people asked, if the powerful are never punished, what kind of democracy is this? And the latest social media ban was seen as another act of corruption. People believed it was not about controlling fake news. It was about silencing criticism. Because on Facebook and YouTube, citizens were openly questioning ministers. On Twitter, they were demanding accountability. By cutting off these platforms, the government thought it could protect itself. But instead, it exposed its fear. Now, something even more surprising happened during the protests. The rise of the monarchy debate. Nepal, as we know, was once a Hindu kingdom. In 2008, after years of struggle, the monarchy was officially abolished, and Nepal became a federal democratic republic. People thought democracy would bring freedom, equality, and prosperity. But after 17 years, what did they see? Endless corruption, unstable governments, and leaders who cared only for themselves. So naturally, many began to ask, was life actually better under the monarchy? During the September 2025 protests, crowds were seen waving the old royal flag. Slogans were shouted in support of the former king. The demand to restore Nepal as a Hindu kingdom was louder than ever. This does not mean every protester wanted the king back, but it shows how deeply frustrated people are with the current political system. When democracy fails to deliver, people start looking for alternatives, even if it means going back to the past. Friends, by this point, Nepal was no longer just protesting. It was burning. Parliament buildings were set on fire. Police stations were attacked. Ministers' houses were targeted. The anger was not controlled anymore. It was explosive. Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli, realizing the pressure, finally resigned. But his resignation did not calm the people. Because the anger was not just about one man. It was about the entire system. The finance minister, once one of the most powerful figures in the government, was chased down and beaten with slippers, a gesture of ultimate humiliation in South Asian culture. And in perhaps the most heartbreaking moment of this chaos, the wife of a former prime minister lost her life when protesters torched her residence. Even in rebellion, innocent lives pay the price. Nepal had reached a point of no return. Friends, while Nepal's streets burned, the world could not look away. For decades, Nepal has been seen as a peaceful nation, the land of Buddha's birth, home to the Himalayas, a country known more for trekking trails and spirituality than for violence. But now, global headlines carried a different image. Nepal in flames. India, Nepal's closest neighbor, watched nervously. For India, Nepal is not just a neighbor. It is a buffer state, a cultural twin, and a vital trade partner. But India also feared something else. If Nepal's youth could bring down their government, could India's restless youth try the same? India officially called for calm, but privately, New Delhi knew this crisis could spill across borders. China, on the other side, had its own concerns. Beijing has invested heavily in Nepal through the Belt and Road Initiative. Roads, hydropower plants, and infrastructure projects, all linked to Chinese money. For China, instability in Nepal threatens its strategic interests. And yet, China also fears something bigger: protests that topple governments. If Nepal's youth succeed, what message does that send to China's own population? Meanwhile, the United Nations issued statements of deep concern. Human rights groups condemn the use of live bullets against peaceful protesters. Videos of police firing on unarmed youth went viral globally, fueling international outrage. But friends, here is the bitter truth. While the world expressed concern, no one rushed to save Nepal. The youth were left alone in their fight. This movement is historic because it marks the first time Generation Z stood united in Nepal. Think about it. A generation raised on smartphones, memes, and TikTok suddenly transformed into revolutionaries. They used VPNs to bypass government bans. They live-streamed protests, shared videos of corruption, and exposed lies in real time. This is the power of the internet generation. Unlike older generations, they are not afraid of authority. They do not believe in waiting for change. They demand it now. But this also raises a dangerous question. If peaceful protests are met with bullets, will tomorrow's protests remain peaceful? Or will anger evolve into something far more violent? So, where does Nepal go from here? There are three possible scenarios. 1. Reform within democracy. If Nepal's politicians finally wake up, acknowledge their failures, and deliver real reforms, jobs, accountability, anti-corruption measures, then democracy might still survive. But for this, leaders would have to sacrifice their greed. Will they? 2. Return of the monarchy. If the current system continues to fail, more and more people may demand the king's return. Already, royalist groups are gaining ground. Could Nepal once again become a Hindu kingdom? It sounds unlikely in the modern world, but remember, in politics, the impossible can quickly become reality. 3. Chaos and collapse, the darkest scenario. If no side compromises, if protests continue, violence escalates, and leaders refuse to step down, Nepal risks sliding into full-scale civil unrest. And in a small, fragile nation, that could mean years of instability. The choice is not easy, but one thing is clear. The youth of Nepal have shown that they cannot be silenced. Friends, this is not just Nepal's story. It is a warning to every government in the world. When young people lose faith in their leaders, when jobs disappear, when corruption becomes normal, when voices are silenced, rebellion is not a question of if, but when. Today, it is Nepal. Tomorrow, it could be anywhere. The so-called useless generation has shown that they hold the real power. Not in parliament seats, not in ministerial offices, but in the streets, in their voices, in their courage. As we close this chapter, let us remember the image that defined September 2025. A young boy, barely 12, lying lifeless on the streets of Kathmandu. His only crime, believing that his voice mattered. From his sacrifice, and from the sacrifices of hundreds of others, a new Nepal may rise. But whether it rises as a stronger democracy, a revived monarchy, or a nation lost to chaos, that depends on what happens next. Friends, history is being written in Nepal right now. And one day, the world may look back at this uprising and say, this was the moment when Gen Z changed everything. The fire of September 2025 will not be forgotten. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more cool videos on trending topics we love to discuss.